Hello, everybody! Welcome to the Multi-Voice Entertainment. 'Tis I, Michael A. Graham, aka the Multi-Voice. I have many voices, but one opinion. And, as you can see, today is June, so my birthday's going to be coming soon. And I decided to get myself a new look, so as you can see, I shaved. And I got myself a haircut. Not too shabby, I may say so myself. But the reason why I show up in this hat here is because there's another topic I have to tell you. Now, ever since I did my talk about Sherlock Holmes being a comic book character, now everybody always knows since superheroes are now in right now, some of you are kind of wondering, I mean, does anybody besides me ever think that, that maybe we should learn how to be more like Sherlock Holmes by playing a certain video game where we learn more about how to solve a mystery and how to be smart like Sherlock Holmes? Well, here's what I'm going to be telling you right now. Believe it or not, there's a lot of PC games, and some of the PC games became PlayStation and Xbox games. Believe it or not. So this time I'm going to be talking about every single Sherlock Holmes games that they made through history. And as what the Sherlock Holmes would say, the game is afoot, Watson. And it is a game that is afoot. I'm going to start out in 1984, Sherlock for the Commodore 64. Now, that was the first Sherlock Holmes games they ever made. And then after that was made in 2005, same year I was born, they made Sherlock Holmes in Another Bow. And then after that, they made another Sherlock Holmes games in 1986 called The Vacation Cameos. Now, I start to realize that the Japanese seems to be a huge fan of video games. Believe it or not, I mean, even in Asian cultures, they seem to be a huge fan of Sherlock Holmes. I mean, heck, I forgot to mention that Russia, they're big fans of Sherlock Holmes, and they make their own series of Sherlock Holmes in Russia. That's right, elementary, my dear Russian. But and the Japanese, the first video game they made, now this one is from the Famicom. And for those of you who don't know what a Famicom is, that's Nintendo. You see, before they call it Nintendo and brought it into America, they call it the Famicom, which is short for Family Computer. And they made the Sherlock Holmes video games in Japan back in 1986. And then I would go on about the Japanese video games of Sherlock Holmes, but I'm talking about the European and the American video games of Sherlock Holmes. Now, of course, there is another Sherlock Holmes, which was in none of the PC, but believe it or not, in 1986, unlike Clue, they made a VCR mystery game called 221B Baker Street VCR Game. Now, one thing I gotta say about that game, it's a lot more fun to play than it is to watch, because in the VCR mystery game Clue, the acting was kind of corny, and some of the scenes were really hilarious, and when some people tried to play it, they just couldn't make heads or tails out of it. But on this Sherlock Holmes game, it's best if you get the game and the stuff inside. Now, of course, the VCR mystery game wasn't exactly the first live-action game of Sherlock Holmes. They even made some PC games that is FMV. Now, if you don't know what FMV means, it's full motion video. So they use real actors playing the characters in the game. And the games they made is Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective 1 to 3. I forgot about in 1996 they made a lost file of Sherlock Holmes' case of the Rose Tattoo. Back in 1993. And then all of a sudden in 2000, that's when they decided to make some PC games that got popular enough that they kept making their own series out of it. And the first Sherlock Holmes game made back in 2004 is, of course, The Mystery of the Mummy. And for those of you who are wondering what kind of game you can get it from, not only it's PC, you can even get the Nintendo DS version of the game. Since when did Nintendo DS starts getting themselves involved in mystery games? And then in 2005, same year I graduated from high school, they made this game, The Case of the Silver Earring. Now, it's not only unlike the last one I mentioned, the Silver Earring case, it's not only PC, it's also from the Nintendo Wii. So you can play that game on the Nintendo Wii? And then there is this really creepy, scary game, and for those of you who are Lovecraftian fans, it's not often that you have a Sherlock Holmes getting himself involved in a Lovecraftian mystery and probably dealing with Cthulhu himself, or Cthulhu, how you pronounce it. Of course, every time when I think of Cthulhu, I'm thinking this. I just love making that noise when I do that. But the game they made is, of course, Sherlock Holmes: The Awakening. And that game was made in 2007. Now, as to me, I don't think much on Sherlock Holmes dealing with Cthulhu. I mean, but heck, there was a writer who wrote a book. Now, I'm going off topic here, but Sherlock Holmes wrote a book where one of the writers wrote a book about Sherlock Holmes dealing with Pinhead from Hellraiser. And it was Sherlock Holmes and the Servants of Hell. Gee, it's not often that Sherlock Holmes entered Clive Barker's world. And I'm not a big fan of Hellraiser. I mean, I saw the first movie, and believe me, one is enough. But of course, to me, I prefer the old-fashioned Victorian forces of evil, like Sherlock Holmes versus Dracula. They made the book, and they also made an audio drama based from the book. You can easily find it on YouTube. And then now back to the games. Then in 2007, same year they made Sherlock Holmes: The Awakened. There's another Sherlock Holmes mystery called Sherlock Holmes Nemesis in 2007. Now, I don't know much on this story, but it turns out that Sherlock Holmes, he met somebody else that is a lot worse than Moriarty. Turns out that there was another character who is more deviant and sly as Moriarty. And his name is Arsène Lupin, who is a French gentleman burglar. And then there was another one made in 2008, and it was Sherlock Holmes and the Mystery of the Persian Carpet. So that's when they got themselves in the carpets. Now, here was a game that they made, and it is kind of a challenging for you to think of, but this one involves a real murder case of a notorious serial killer back in the Victorian era. And it is Sherlock Holmes versus Jack the Ripper. You know, Jack the Ripper was the only serial killer in real life where nobody never could figure out who it was. Now, I do have my own theory, but I can't say it because there might be kids listening, and I'll probably ask the parents awkward questions, so I can't. I mean, I'm not really much into serial killers, but I do learn a thing or two about criminologists. And believe it or not, the Robert Downey Jr. movie of Sherlock Holmes, they did make a game based from it, and it is Sherlock Holmes, the official movie game. And if you want to know what game system you can play that in, it's the N-Gage. It's like a cell phone where you can play games with it, but it was short-lived, so it only had like a few games, and I bet none of them weren't even that good to play with. And then in 2010, they made another series of Sherlock Holmes called The Lost Case of Sherlock Holmes 1 and 2. Now, Nintendo DS also made some Sherlock Holmes games. One is called The Mystery of the Osborne House and The Mystery of the Frozen City. And another game I mentioned, based on my favorite book of all, Hound of the Baskerville, not only on PC and Nintendo DS as well. And it's not just a mystery game, it's more like an I Spy game where there's a certain item you need to find in it. And then here's a game I have on PlayStation 3, and I never beaten this game because it was kind of complicated, and I couldn't keep up with some of the evidence I found. But it is The Testament of Sherlock Holmes. I have that game, but I never beat it because it was just kind of complicated. I guess I cannot think like Sherlock Holmes, but who knows? I mean, games are games. I mean, it's not like you can play Mortal Kombat and you think you're an ultimate fighter, that you can take down everybody just because you played Mortal Kombat. I don't think that works. And then there was another game they made for PlayStation 4 and Xbox 360, and it is Sherlock Holmes: Crimes and Punishments. And then here is this really shocking mystery game they made, Sherlock Holmes and the Devil's Daughter. Made back in 2016. And they made that game because it turns out that Sherlock Holmes have adopted a girl, so now Sherlock Holmes has a daughter, and he was trying to keep her away from the dangers goes on in Victoria, London. But there's somebody who's trying to capture her. And then here comes the latest one. It came out last year, and it is Sherlock Holmes Chapter 1. Now, one thing I know about that Sherlock Holmes games is that game, you play young Sherlock Holmes, and you start your first murder mystery. Now, the only game I ever had a chance to play Sherlock Holmes, now, I have it on my phone, but now it's gone, so I can't get it back because somehow it got expired, so they removed it out of the game. But I wish they would bring it back, is Clue Sherlock style. In the game, I mean, every time when I play Clue, I love playing Sherlock Holmes. So, pretty much this is my talk for today. And if any of you are interested in any of those games, or is there any games I left out, any Sherlock Holmes video games I left out, please leave a comment down below, hit like and subscribe for more. And like what Sherlock Holmes says, the game is afoot, Watson. Later.